Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments which method you would trust most if electricity vanished overnight. Salt, smoke, fermentation, or underground storage. Now step into a medieval kitchen and notice the first rule that governs everything here. Fresh food is a countdown, not a guarantee, and the kitchen is built like a defense system against time. The shock is how fast danger arrives. Meat, milk, and cooked stews do not wait politely. Odor is only a late warning, so the goal is to prevent conditions that let spoilage win in the first place: warmth, moisture, and air exposure. Medieval cooks do not have thermometers or modern sanitation, but they have a disciplined routine and a clear enemy. Waste is not only expensive, it is risky, because sickness can travel through a household and ruin a working season. The first major tool is salt, treated almost like a form of wealth. Dry salting pulls water out of meat and fish, reducing the moisture that microbes need. The technique is physical and measurable even without instruments. Cut the pieces smaller to increase surface area, rub salt into every seam, and layer the meat so brine can drain or be managed. If the salt is too little, the center stays wet and unsafe. If it is too much without soaking later, the food becomes nearly inedible. Brining solves a different problem by surrounding food in salty liquid, but it only works when the concentration stays strong and the container stays clean. A weak brine becomes a warm bath for decay. Then you notice the hearth is not only for cooking, it is a preservation engine. Smoke adds a protective chemical layer and dries surfaces, but the real advantage is that it creates a controlled zone where food can hang in moving air and stay away from animals. Rafters and beams are not just architecture, they are storage infrastructure. Strips of meat and fish are positioned where heat is gentle, smoke is steady, and airflow is reliable. Too close to flame and you cook the outside while leaving the inside risky. Too far and you only perfume the food without preserving it. Drying is the quiet partner of both salt and smoke. Medieval kitchens used drafts, lofts, and sheltered outdoor racks to pull moisture out of herbs, fruits, thin fish, and even some meats. The principle is simple: reduce water, reduce spoilage. But the method is tactical. You avoid damp fog and rainy days, you turn pieces to prevent wet pockets, and you protect from insects. A well-dried apple slice becomes winter sweetness. A poorly dried one becomes mold that can ruin everything stored near it. Pickling appears next, and it feels almost modern because it is chemistry you can taste. Acid locks down many spoilage pathways. Vinegar is common, but so are sour whey and other fermented liquids that bring acidity and salt together. Vegetables survive because the environment becomes hostile to the wrong microbes. The jar matters as much as the recipe. A dirty vessel, a cracked glaze, or hands that introduce contamination can undo the whole batch. The medieval cook learns to respect containers like tools, not like background objects. Fermentation is the most impressive trick because it turns risk into control. The kitchen does not defeat microbes by eliminating them, it defeats them by recruiting the right ones. Dough becomes bread because yeast races faster than rot. Grain becomes beer or ale because fermentation creates an environment that keeps some dangers down and makes calories portable. Even vegetables can be preserved by letting beneficial fermentation acidify them before spoilage takes over. The rule is timing. You must start the process while the ingredients are still healthy, because fermentation cannot rescue food that is already breaking down. By the end of this first stretch, you can see the medieval logic clearly. Preservation is not one miracle method, it is layered defenses. Remove moisture with salt and drying, add protective compounds with smoke, and change the microbial battlefield with acid and fermentation. But the next question is where all of this food actually lives once it is preserved, because keeping it safe is not only about making it last, it is about stopping it from being stolen, crushed, soaked, or quietly ruined in storage. What surprises you next is that medieval preservation is only half kitchencraft and half storage engineering. Once food is salted, smoked, dried, pickled, or fermented, it still needs a place where temperature stays low, moisture stays controlled, and pests do not treat the pantry like an open invitation. This is where the household turns earth, stone, fat, and discipline into a kind of refrigeration substitute. The coolest technology is the ground itself. Root cellars, buried pits, and shaded stone rooms work because soil temperature changes slowly. Even in summer, a well-built cellar stays cooler than the air above, and that slows spoilage. The details matter. You keep the entrance small to reduce warm air exchange, you store foods off the floor to avoid damp, and you separate strong-smelling items so mold and odors do not migrate. A cellar is not a single room, it is a system of zones, each one tuned to what it protects. Then you see a method that feels almost like armor. Cooked meats can be potted under fat, sealed from air. Confit-style preservation works by cooking the meat thoroughly, packing it tightly, and covering it with rendered fat that hardens into a barrier. The principle is oxygen control. Less air contact means fewer pathways for spoilage. But it is also a cleanliness test. If the meat goes in with contamination, the fat seal becomes a trap that hides trouble until the moment you break it open. This is where medieval kitchens learn that preservation is unforgiving. The method is strong, but only if the process is strict. That strictness is why the midpoint of this story is not a success. It is a reversal. A preserved batch that should be safe turns risky, and the household learns why. A brine that was strong on day one can be diluted by careless topping off. A crock can be contaminated by a ladle that touched raw meat. Smoke can dry the surface while leaving the interior wet if pieces are too thick. The danger is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a quiet stomach illness that spreads through a household and steals days of labor. In the medieval world, that is a crisis. So cooks develop sensory testing that is sharper than most modern people expect. Smell is important, but texture and surface clues can be earlier warnings. Sliminess on fish, unexpected bubbling in a sealed pot, fuzzy growth at the edge of a brine line, or a sour note that does not match the intended fermentation are signals to stop and reassess. They also learn false alarms. Some strong odors belong to safe fermentation. Some color changes happen in smoke curing without meaning spoilage. The skill is pattern recognition built from repetition. This is also where the myth about spices gets exposed. Spices can help flavor and sometimes bring mild antimicrobial effects, but they are not a magical eraser for rot. Medieval cooks use spices for taste, status, and variety, not as a reliable safety device. When food is already turning, spices mostly hide the warning, and hiding the warning is how people get hurt. The real safety comes from salt concentration, acidity, drying, airflow, and clean storage. Religion and calendar rules then push preservation into high gear. Fasting days and fish days create demand spikes that force households and towns to plan. Fish that must be eaten when meat is restricted becomes a storage economy. Salted herring, smoked fish, dried fish, and preserved sauces that travel from coasts to inland markets. Preservation is not only private survival, it is logistics. Now you can feel the clock pressure of the medieval year. The kitchen is constantly balancing what can be eaten today versus what must be transformed into something that survives tomorrow. The next step is the biggest battlefield of all, grain and dairy, because if those fail, the entire household diet collapses. Grain is the medieval kitchen's foundation, and preserving it is less romantic than curing meat, but more decisive. Moisture is the enemy and mice are the second enemy. Grain is stored in raised bins, sealed barrels, and sacks kept off the floor to reduce damp and discourage pests. Ventilation matters, because trapped humidity invites mold, and mold can poison more than it spoils. Milling schedules are part of preservation too. Whole grain keeps longer than flour, so households often store grain and grind closer to use, even if it costs labor, because shelf life is worth more than convenience. Bread preservation follows the same logic. Fresh loaves do not last, so households bake in rhythms that match need and fuel. Hard breads and twice-baked breads exist because lower moisture means longer keeping. Leftover bread becomes thickener, porridge, or soaked meals rather than waste. Nothing here is casual. Every crumb is managed because calories are security. Dairy looks impossible without refrigeration until you see the conversion strategy. Milk spoils quickly, so medieval kitchens rarely keep it as milk for long. They turn it into butter, cheese, and cultured products that last longer. Salted butter holds better than sweet butter. Hard cheeses age into stability when the rind forms and moisture drops. Whey is not waste. It can become part of pickling or feeding, and it can carry acidity into other preservation tasks. The kitchen is constantly shifting ingredients into forms that resist time. Eggs, honey, and wax reveal the quieter side of medieval storage. Honey is naturally protective and can hold fruits or herbs. Wax seals reduce air contact on certain stores. In some regions and later periods, Lime water storage for eggs appears as a way to slow air exchange through the shell, stretching the usable season. The common thread is always the same: block air, control moisture, and keep temperatures steady. Then the calendar tightens again with winter slaughter. Cold weather becomes a window of opportunity. Animals are slaughtered when the air helps slow decay, and the household moves fast. The work is urgent because a large animal is too much fresh meat at once. That is when salting, smoking, drying, and fat sealing become a coordinated workflow. The preservation methods are not random options. They are assigned based on cut, fat content, thickness, and intended use. Thin cuts dry and smoke well. Fatty pieces pot well. Bones and scraps become stocks and pottages that are eaten quickly. All of it depends on containers and cleanliness, which is the real medieval technology hiding in plain sight. Clay crocks, barrels, wooden tubs, pitch sealing, ash for scrubbing, boiling water for scalding, and strict separation of raw and preserved foods reduce contamination. A cracked vessel can ruin a batch. A reused brine can spread trouble. A dirty hand can undo weeks of planning. Medieval kitchens do not know microbes as a concept, but they know cause and effect, and they build rules that work. Outside the household, towns add another layer: markets, guilds, and inspections. Spoiled food is not only a private misfortune, it is a civic threat. Rules about bread weight, ale quality, fish freshness, and market cleanliness exist because a bad batch can trigger sickness and unrest. Enforcement is inconsistent, but the intent is clear. Preservation is part of public order. Now the story is ready for the final outcome. After all these methods, what actually lasts, for how long, and under what conditions, and how does a medieval kitchen weave it into a year-long system that can rival refrigeration through discipline alone? The final reality check is shelf life, because medieval preservation is powerful but not magical. Salted meat can last weeks to months depending on salt strength, thickness, and storage temperature, but it often needs soaking before cooking to become edible. Smoked foods keep longer when they are also dried, because smoke alone is not enough if moisture remains trapped inside. Dried fish and thin-dried meats can hold for months if they stay dry and protected from insects. Pickled vegetables can last for months when acidity stays strong and the container stays sealed and clean, but once a crock is opened and repeatedly dipped into, the clock restarts. Fermented foods can be stable for long periods if the fermentation is complete and the environment stays cool, but warm conditions can push them into unwanted directions. Grain can last many months or longer when it stays dry, aired, and protected from rodents, but damp grain is a fast disaster. Hard cheeses can keep for months to years in the right cellar conditions, while soft cheeses are far more seasonal. Butter, especially salted, stretches time, but it still suffers in heat. Ale and beer act as both nutrition and safer drink in many contexts, yet they also have limits, with some styles meant to be consumed quickly and others built to last longer through strength and storage. What matters is that medieval kitchens do not bet everything on one method. They spread risk across methods, seasons, and foods. They preserve some meat heavily for deep winter, some lightly for near-term use, and some as fat-sealed pots for travel and quick meals. They balance preserved fish against fasting calendars. They use fermented staples that renew themselves, like sourdough starters and brewing cycles. They keep vegetables through pickling and drying, not to mimic fresh produce but to keep nutrients and variety alive when fields are sleeping. The kitchen itself becomes a map of controlled environments. The rafters are a drying rack. The hearth zone is a smoke chamber. The pantry is a rotation system where older stores sit forward and newer stores sit behind. The cellar is the slow time room, cool and dark, where cheese, roots, and sealed crocks wait out warm days. Even the choice of pot and lid is a survival decision, because the container determines how much air, moisture, and contamination can reach the food. The biggest lesson is that preservation is discipline, not a trick. You must start with sound ingredients, act early, measure by habit, keep tools clean, keep hands clean, and respect the conditions that make each method work. A strong brine is useless if it is diluted. Smoke is useless if pieces are too thick and stay wet inside. A fat seal protects only what was properly cooked and packed. Fermentation rewards patience but punishes neglect. These methods can outperform refrigeration in certain ways, not by freezing time, but by turning food into a new stable form. By the end of the year, a well-run medieval kitchen does not simply survive without cold storage. It creates reliability. It turns summer abundance into winter calories, transforms fragile milk into durable cheese, converts perishable meat into transportable stores, and uses earth and fire as steady allies. And the final twist is that many of these practices still underpin modern food culture, because they were never only about the past. They are about understanding what spoilage needs and denying it, again and again, with systems. Now consider the most uncomfortable question. If you had to choose only one medieval method to carry you through an entire year, would you trust salt and dryness, smoke and airflow, fermentation and acidity, or the cool stability of the ground, knowing that every method fails the moment routine slips?